Before I get started, I just want to thank everyone for all the musical gifts in this service. I want to thank our choir, and I want to thank Brett Carson, and I want to thank Laura Zucker for being our conductor today for our early service. My friends, I want to begin this morning with a few questions. And my first one is this: how is it with your spirit? How is it with your spirit? Yeah, that's probably an appropriate answer. I will say it's good to see so many of you, and I have appreciated the other times we've been, many of us, together this week, as we've come together to hold what is in our increasingly shocked dismay at the state of our nation and what this election has revealed about it. And I want to acknowledge from the very beginning that we don't all have the same reaction to what has happened, and that will be one of our challenges in the days to come. For some among us, perhaps who are black or brown, or who were not born here in the United States, or have loved ones who are not born here in the United States, for people that are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, or people who have been extremely politically active and who understand that our activism could be used against us in the world in which we live, this is an especially frightening time. So I have a second question for you. How is it with your heart? How is it with your heart? I ask you to think about this because many of us are having what I would describe as that grief hangover. That's what I call the day after when somebody that you love has died or something bad has happened, and you wake up for that first morning and you have to re-experience that awareness again, right? You've forgotten it in your sleep, and then you have to remember it again. And sometimes if it's a really big loss, you have to remember it morning after morning after morning after morning. The emotional impact is big. And then there's that part of your mind that is always asking, why? So that's my last question for you. How is it with your mind this morning? How is it with your mind? Because for many of us, we're still reeling, we're still confused, we're still trying to get our bearings. And after Tuesday's national election, we're asking why. And we will be doing so, I suspect, for a very long time. And this is what I want to say about that question, why. Not the existential large question, why, but the smaller questions, why, that we're going to be tempted to ask in these coming days and weeks and months. We can cut one another to ribbons with our theories about what happened and who is to blame, or we could just skip that part and get to the work at hand. Because no matter why it happened in the smaller sense, what we know is that it was not about love. Now, love may not be a word that speaks to you, and I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about love in the smallest sense. I'm talking about love in the largest sense. I'm talking about something that many among us say about God. Tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that God either. So tell me about the love you don't believe in, and I probably don't believe in that kind of love either. But I do believe in the largest sense of love. We're not talking about an easy love or a feel-good love. We're talking about the force so solid that it gets us through the nights of anxiety, the force so guiding it helps us make choices to help people even when that's not the norm. The love so big that it walked the Underground Railroad kind of love. It walked across the Pettus Bridge kind of love, the Stonewall kind of love, the love that has resisted efforts to dehumanize people across the centuries. That is the love that I'm talking about today. What Tuesday's election showed us, I believe, was a stew of issues, and yet none of them were about love. Racism was in the mix, fascism, which those who study it say arises when a group that has been in power buys into a narrative that they should keep power at all costs. And many people who have studied fascism across the world and across the spectrum of time say we do, in fact, have those elements among us now. Economics were in the mix, especially with several of the richest men in the world weighing in to tip the scales. Disillusionment was in the mix with a very predictable lower turnout from younger voters who kept warning and warning and warning us that they weren't feeling a real choice. So they didn't make one. And there was also disinformation in the mix, and I think that's something we cannot underestimate. There was so much disinformation, especially because a few of those multi-billionaires have become oligarchs as far as the control of the media in this nation. It's such a stew, and our spirits and our hearts and our minds are trying to sort it all out, the whys. But now, what we are actually faced with are the whats. And what we are about to face is not about love. So we will need to be love stewards. Many of us will know that no matter what this last Tuesday's outcome was, we would have to be love stewards. And yet to see the numbers can be overwhelming. To know that extremist views will face few, if any, counters from our treasured checks and balances makes us feel grief-stricken and frightened at what our nation has become. And yet, I believe with all my heart that if we recommit to that largest form of love and democracy, rather than the divisions, which are, yes, a capitulation to those who are so good at getting us to divide ourselves so they can conquer us, then we are not alone. We do not know exactly what our next steps will be, but we do know this, that our very structure as a religious people, as a people of faith, is structured and centered around democracy, and it is one that has chosen time and time again to widen love's circle rather than to make it smaller. We know that. We know that that is the kind of love that includes ourselves. Conscious anxiety does not serve us or the world, and care of our bodies and spirits is essential for us to survive, and our survival is one of the best retaliations against what has happened and what may happen. Our community is love's healing embodied. Unitarian Universalist President Sophia Bentencourt sent these words to our membership this week. "What I do know," she said, "beyond any reasonable doubt, is that we are a sanctuary people. We can make that claim from the powerful efforts of our elders in the middle of the 20th century through to our congregations and communities offering shelter to migrants today, whether Harbor or Pink Haven, our homes, sanctuaries, and even our national headquarters model what it means to offer solidarity, shelter, and asylum in the face of what many of us cannot begin to imagine. These are times that will be defined," she says, "by the continued and increased need for organizing and a faithful commitment to mutual aid." Now, Reverend Rodney and Rose and I have witnessed that kind of love here all week, on Tuesday and then again on Wednesday, and then last night too as we came together for joy. And in these coming weeks and months and years, what we're going to be looking at is something that is not going to be fixed in the next election cycle, and maybe not the one after that, because all after this election cycles may look very different than what we have seen. Historian Heather Cox Richardson, in her book Democracy Awakening, which I will invite people to read and discuss with me later this month, observes that democracies die more often through the ballot box than at gunpoint. She also notes that it's not about love nor about truth, stating the key to the rise of authoritarians is their use of language and false history. And folks, we have seen a lot of language and a lot of false history in these weeks just gone by. And we can do this hard thing and face where we are together. Bishop William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign reminded us that this was an election in which the issues of the working poor were not addressed. He said, "I did not see one debate focused on poverty, even though 800 people in our nation are dying a day from poverty." He also notes that while our president-elect may feel he has a mandate, nobody has a mandate to overturn the Constitution. Nobody has a mandate to overturn the Constitution. And there's no mandate on Project 2025. In fact, Barber points out, President-elect Trump got less votes than he did in 2020 when he lost. Healthcare, living wage, and childcare were not even discussed in this election, nor, might I add, was our role in Gaza. We need to learn new ways to love. We need to learn about the choices we will make with our dollars and think about whether comfort and convenience is worth supporting people who think that having hundreds of billions of dollars is not enough. We need to understand the reasons that the stock market would celebrate a victory on Tuesday and then think about that in our own lives. We wanted to think about what business leadership is now and what it used to be when such leadership used to include a concern for the civic fabric in which one did business. We need to think about where we will be learning about love in a world where that same small group of very powerful oligarchs now control a disturbing amount of the media. It's time for us to dig down and see who owns the Wall Street Journal now, who owns the Washington Post, who owns the LA Times, who owns the Atlantic magazine. Perhaps it's not who you thought. Instead of love, we are being taught to fear our neighbors, and the messaging is subtle and effective. We need to ask where we are going to turn and how we are going to get information that we need if NPR and PBS no longer receive government support under a democracy focused on fear and misinformation rather than truth and an embracing love. We need to learn new strategies for the ones that we have had and about organizing may not work in these new times. I know one area that so many people have talked to me about this week is the area of climate change. And with our government out as a leader, we may need to rely on mass strikes and boycotts, which have brought down many authoritarian regimes in the past. We may need to look at shareholder activism. We may need to look at other economic actions. We need to extend love to the true, informed, global leaders on this issue who come from countries we once treated with disdain. As we keep learning, we will have some opportunities to look at different models of democracy, the bison models rather than the bald eagle models, as Brandon spoke of today. And in the new year, we'll have a series of different ways to learn about the paradoxes of democracy that face us now. Reverend Rodney and I will be shifting our ministers' class starting in January to focus on this, and there will be many other opportunities, so stay connected. Here is the thing. Democracy is woven into the fabric of our faith, and as such, we will be, I believe, a seed bank for love-centered democracy, and for democracy which many in our nation have decided is outdated and unneeded. Many of them believe it is more efficient to have a small group of hyper-wealthy people run everything in our world. And many of us do not agree with that. We will be sanctuary communities for the belief that women deserve autonomy, that migrants are valued, that people of all sexual orientations and gender identities deserve their dignity and not to be used as a wedge issue, that the generations on this planet and future generations deserve to survive and to thrive. Because I believe that if we can together take care of ourselves, take care of each other, ground ourselves in that widest sense of a community of love, we will also have the strength that we will need to stand fast against reversals. America is at a crossroads, Heather Cox Richardson tells us. A country which once stood as the global symbol of democracy has been teetering on the brink of authoritarianism for a while now. William Barber reminds us of the enduring strength of a vision grounded in love, noting that when Plessy versus Ferguson, which established separate but equal standards for education, was adopted, it took 58 years for it to be reversed. 58 years. So he says, so we get up this morning, we go back to the same kind of strength people had when they woke up in 1897 and there was an election to turn back America, or in 1896 when Plessy happened, or in 1914 when a white supremacist was elected to the White House and played Birth of a Nation in his Oval Office, or 1955 when we woke up and Emmett Till was killed, or 1963 when 4 girls were killed in a Birmingham church, or 1963 when a president was assassinated, or 1968 when Martin King was assassinated, he said. People, he says, had to own their own tears, own their own pain, own their frustration, and then still get back up and declare that we will still fight for this democracy. Thank you, Reverend Barber. This is what I believe with all my heart, that love-centered democracy may seem like a pipe dream right now, and yet what do we have if we also let them take away our dreams and our ideals? Just as our democracy has always been an ideal, so have we been as a community of love. So let us not let go of the dream of love-centered democracy, and let us live into our purpose as a community. And though we can abhor some of the things that we will witness in this time, we have the resources, I do believe, to meet the challenges before us. Let us do so and show the largeness, the power of love over hate, truth over pernicious falsehood, and hope over despair. And together, may we be the ones to make it so.